40 soul food, cooking tricks, and my grandmama Cleo never wrote down a single one. She showed me how to lay bacon in a cold pan before the skillet got hot and let the heat come up slow, and that one trick set the flavor for every breakfast I cooked for the next 60 years. Nobody in my family owned a cookbook. Nobody needed one. The women I grew up with carried everything they knew in their hands, and when those hands stopped moving, the knowing went with them. Number 7 on this list is something my mama taught me about tough meat and a heavy lid that changed the way I cook to this day. And number 12, that is a little secret for chocolate cake that most people never think of. These are the things that lived in kitchens and Sunday mornings and never made it onto a page. Here are 40 soul food cooking tricks Mama Odessa never wrote down. Number 40. Testing oil with a bread crumb. You do not need a thermometer to know when oil is ready. Tear off a small piece of day-old bread and drop it in. If it sinks and sits there quiet, your oil is cold. If it hits the surface and starts dancing, bubbling up golden within a few seconds, you are where you need to be. If it turns dark the second it touches, pull that pot off the heat. My mama never owned a thermometer in her life, and she fried catfish that would make you close your eyes. Number 39, the grease tin by the stove. Every kitchen I grew up in had a tin or a coffee can sitting next to the burners, and every woman I knew poured her cooking grease into it while it was still warm. That grease was not waste. It was the start of the next meal. A spoonful in the skillet before you scrambled eggs, a little in the pot before you started your greens. You bought oil when you had to, but the grease tin meant you almost never had to. Number 38, soaking beans the night before. You put your dried beans in a bowl of cool water before you went to bed and let them sit all night. By morning they had swelled up soft and even, and they cooked in about half the time. The water pulls out some of the sugars that give people trouble with their stomach too. Grandmama Cleo always said a pot of beans that was not soaked was a pot of beans that did not respect your time. Number 37. Salting in stages. You do not dump all your salt in at the start and hope for the best. You salt when the onions go in. You salt again when the meat goes in. You taste and salt a third time toward the end. Each layer seasons a different part of the dish, and by the time it is done, the flavor sits deep inside, not just on top. One heavy hand at the beginning gives you food that tastes flat in the middle and sharp on the outside. Number 36, the buttermilk soak for fish. Before you bread your catfish or whiting, you lay it in a bowl of buttermilk for at least an hour. The acid in that buttermilk pulls out any muddy taste and softens the flesh so the coating grabs hold and does not slide off in the oil. My mama kept a jar of buttermilk in the icebox all summer just for fish. Number 35, flipping cornbread out face down. Soon as that cornbread comes out of the oven, you turn the skillet over on a clean towel and let it fall out bottom side up. The steam escapes downward instead of sitting against the crust and making it soggy. 5 minutes face down and you got a crust that crunches when you break it. Leave it in the pan and you got a crust that bends. Number 34, dry toasting flour for brown gravy. You put a cup of plain flour in a dry skillet over medium heat and you stir it without stopping until it turns the color of peanut butter. That toasted flour is what gives your gravy that deep, nutty taste and that dark color without adding anything else. Raw flour gives you pale gravy that tastes like paste. Toasted flour gives you gravy that tastes like sundae. I think about all the kitchens I have stood in. My grandmama Cleo's kitchen in Humphreys County had one window that faced east and a wood stove that took 20 minutes to heat right. My mama's kitchen in the same house had the same stove, the same window, and the same pot of greens on a Saturday afternoon. Nobody in those kitchens ever said the word technique. Nobody said method. They said, "Watch me do this." And you stood there and you watched, and your hands learned what your mouth could not explain. That is how cooking moved through our families. Not through pages, through standing close enough to feel the heat. Number 33, stretching a pot with rice. When there were more mouths than meat, you made more rice. A cup of rice turned a thin stew into a full plate. A bowl of red beans over a hill of rice fed a man who worked outside all day. The meat flavored the pot. The rice carried the meal. Every woman I knew understood that arithmetic without ever writing it down. Number 32, double dipping chicken through the flour. You dredge your chicken in seasoned flour, then dip it in egg or buttermilk, then back through the flour again. That second pass is what builds the thick, craggy crust that holds up in the oil and stays crispy on the plate. One pass gives you a thin coating that breaks apart. 2 passes gives you fried chicken worth bragging about. Number 31, saving the pot liquor. The liquid left in the pot after you cook your greens is not dirty water. It is full of everything those greens gave up while they cooked. All the minerals, all the flavor from your seasoning meat. You drink it from a cup, you use it to cook your rice in, you pour it over cornbread. Throwing out pot liquor is like throwing out the best part of the meal. Number 30, a pinch of sugar in anything with tomatoes. Tomatoes carry acid, and that acid can turn a stew sour if you let it. A pinch of sugar, just a small one between your fingers, takes that sharp edge off without making anything taste sweet. You are not making dessert. You are balancing the pot. My mama did it with stewed tomatoes, with spaghetti sauce, with anything red in the pot. Number 29, measuring rice water with your knuckle. You put your rice in the pot, level it flat, then lay your fingertip on top of the rice and pour water until it hits your first knuckle. Works every time, any pot, any amount of rice. That is roughly the right water-to-rice ratio, about 1.5 to 1, and your grandmama knew it 50 years before anybody printed it on the bag. Number 28, starting bacon in a cold pan. Most people heat the skillet first and then lay the bacon in, and the outside sears before the fat has a chance to render out slow. My mama taught me different. You lay your bacon in a cold pan and bring the heat up together, and what happens is the fat melts out gradually, even and steady, so the meat cooks through at the same pace the outside crisps up. You end up with a flat strip that is crispy all the way across instead of a curled up piece that is burnt on the edges and chewy in the middle. The science behind it is simple. Bacon fat needs time to melt before the protein tightens, and a hot pan locks that fat inside where it steams the meat instead of rendering out clean. A cold start gives the fat a head start on the heat, and everything finishes together. My mama cooked bacon every single morning that I can remember, and she never once started with a hot pan. I asked her why when I was a girl, and she said, because the pig and the pan need to get to know each other. That did not make sense to me until I was old enough to understand that what she meant was you cannot rush something that needs to happen slow. The rendered fat that collects in that cold start pan is cleaner too. It goes straight into the grease tin without any of those bitter burnt bits that come from searing too fast. And that grease is gold. You use it the next morning for your eggs. You use it to start a pot of beans. You use it to grease your cornbread skillet. A cold start batch of bacon on Monday morning set up the flavor for the whole week in our house. My mama would lay 6 strips in that pan before the sun came up, and by the time we were dressed for school, the whole house smelled like morning had already decided to be good to us. Number 27, day-old bread for pudding. Fresh bread falls apart into mush when you pour the custard on it. Bread that sat out on the counter overnight has dried just enough to hold its shape and soak up all that egg and milk and vanilla without dissolving. The staler the bread, the better the pudding. We never threw bread out. It just became dessert. Number 26, squeezing water from cooked greens before finishing. After you boil your greens down, you pull them out and press the water out with the back of a spoon or your hands if they are cool enough. Then you finish them in a skillet with your seasonings. All that extra water dilutes whatever you add after. A dry green holds on to flavor. A wet green lets it run right off. Number 25, skimming the foam off boiling beans. When your beans first come to a hard boil, a gray foam rises to the top. That foam carries the starches and impurities that make your pot cloudy and your beans gritty. You skim it off with a spoon and throw it away. Takes 30 seconds, and the difference between a clean pot of beans and a muddy one. When I moved to Memphis to live with my daughter, I brought two things from my mama's kitchen: a cast iron skillet that her mama gave her, and the way she stood at the stove. Left hand on her hip, right hand on the spoon, feet a little wider than her shoulders. I did not plan to copy that. I just looked down one morning and there I was, standing exactly the way she stood, in a kitchen 100 miles from where she cooked her last meal. The body remembers what the mind lets go. That is why these tricks survived. Not because anybody was smart enough to write them down, but because the body would not let them die. Number 24. Cooking roux until it smells like pecans. You stir equal parts, fat and flour, over steady heat, and you do not walk away. When it passes tan and turns the color of a paper bag and the kitchen smells like roasted pecans, that is your roux. Pull it a minute too late and it is burnt. Pull it a minute too soon and your gumbo tastes flat. Your nose does the timing. Number 23. Low and slow on tough cuts. Oxtails, neck bones, shanks. You cook them on low heat with the lid on for hours until the connective tissue breaks down into gelatin and the meat slides off the bone without a fight. High heat tightens that tissue like a fist. Low heat loosens it like a deep breath. Patience is the only ingredient that separates tough meat from tender. Number 22. Wrapping bread in a damp towel. Hot cornbread or biscuits wrapped in a clean, damp cloth stays soft and warm for an hour on the table. The moisture in the towel keeps the surface from drying out while the cloth holds the heat in. My mama set a towel-wrapped basket of biscuits on every Sunday table, and they were still warm when the preacher finished his second plate. Number 21. Coffee and red-eye gravy. After you fry your country ham, you pour a cup of strong black coffee into that hot skillet and scrape up all the brown bits. The coffee deglazes the pan and mixes with the ham drippings into a thin, dark, salty gravy that you pour over biscuits or grits. The bitterness of the coffee cuts through the salt of the ham and makes both taste sharper. Number 20. Warming the plates. You set your plates in a low oven or run hot water over them before you serve. Food on a cold plate loses heat in 2 minutes. Food on a warm plate holds its temperature long enough for everyone to sit down, say grace, and eat without rushing. Small thing. Makes the whole table feel different. Number 19. Stirring grits in one direction. You pour your grits into boiling water and you stir them slow, always the same way around the pot. Changing direction breaks up the starch strands that are trying to form, and you end up with lumpy grits that never get smooth no matter how long you cook them. One direction, patient and steady, and those grits turn creamy without a drop of cream. Number 18. Saving every bone for stock. Chicken bones, ham bones, turkey carcass the day after Thanksgiving. You put them in the biggest pot you own with water and whatever vegetables you had on hand, an onion cut in half, a few stalks of celery, a carrot if you had one, and you let it simmer for hours on the back burner. By the end of the day, you had a pot of golden liquid that turned any soup, any gravy, any pot of rice into something that tasted like it took all week to make. My grandmama Cleo kept a stock pot going most of the winter. She called it her second stove because it heated the kitchen and fed the family at the same time. Buying broth from the store would have been like buying air. Everything you needed was already in the bones. The collagen from the joints made the liquid thick and rich when it cooled. That gelatin is the reason homemade soup clings to the spoon and the store-bought kind runs right off. When my daughter was small, she used to stand at the counter and watch me strain the stock through a piece of cheesecloth into mason jars. She asked me once why I kept all those bones in a bag in the freezer, and I told her, "Baby, that bag is a week of soup waiting to happen." You save the bones from Sunday chicken, the neck from the turkey, the joint ends from the ham at Christmas. You drop them all in together, and the pot does not care that they came from different meals. It takes what each one has to offer and turns it into something better than any of them were alone. I have made thousands of pots of stock in my life, and every single one started with something most people threw in the trash. Number 17. The oven door is a warming shelf. You crack that oven door open just a few inches after you turn it off and set a plate or a bowl on the pulled-out rack. The leftover heat keeps the food warm without cooking it further. Every kitchen I grew up in used the oven door this way. Nobody called it a warming drawer. It was just what you did. People ask me sometimes, "Odessa, why did your mama cook so much?" And the honest answer is she did not have a choice. 7 children. A husband who worked from before light to after dark. No restaurant to walk to, no frozen meal to heat up. Cooking was not her hobby. It was the reason we all survived. And the tricks she used were not clever. They were necessary. When you have to feed 7 people on what you grow and what you can carry home from the store in one bag, you learn to waste nothing, stretch everything, and turn the cheap cuts into something that makes a child ask for more. That is not a cooking style. That is love doing math. Number 16, scoring ham before glazing. You take a sharp knife and cut a diamond pattern into the fat on top of your ham before you put the glaze on. Those cuts let the sugar and spice sink down into the meat instead of just sitting on the surface. The scored edges caramelize into crispy little ridges that are the best bites on the whole ham. Without the scoring, your glaze slides off and pools at the bottom of the pan. Number 15, a whole onion in the greens. You drop 1 whole peeled onion into the pot with your collards or turnip greens and let it cook down with them for hours. That onion gives up its sweetness slow, and it balances the bitterness that greens carry naturally. You do not eat the onion. It has done its job by the time the greens are ready. Pull it out and set it aside. Number 14, tapping cornbread to know when it is done. You open the oven and tap the top of the cornbread with your knuckle. If it sounds hollow, like knocking on a door that nobody is behind, it is ready. If it sounds dense and flat, give it 5 more minutes. My mama never set a timer for cornbread in her life. She listened to the pan. Number 13, finishing greens with vinegar. Right before you serve your greens, you splash in a little apple cider vinegar or white vinegar. The acid brightens up the whole pot and lifts flavors that have been sitting together for hours. Without it, greens taste deep but flat. With it, every bite has a little spark at the end that makes you want the next one. Number 12, dusting a chocolate cake pan with cocoa. When you bake a regular cake, you flour the pan so the cake does not stick. But flour on a chocolate cake leaves white streaks on the outside. You use cocoa powder instead. Same job, no white marks, and it adds a little more chocolate flavor to the crust. My mama figured that out because she only had 1 cake pan and she could not stand an ugly cake. Number 11, rendering your own lard. You take the white fat from around a pork loin or from the butcher and cut it into small pieces. Put it in a heavy pot on low heat and let it melt down slow, stirring now and then. Strain out the solid bits and pour the clear liquid into a jar. That lard makes the flakiest biscuits and the crispiest fried chicken you will ever taste. The cracklings left behind go on top of cornbread. Number 10, cooling pie on the windowsill. A fresh pie needs air moving around it to set up right. You set it on the windowsill because the breeze cools the filling evenly and carries the steam away. A pie that cools in a closed-up kitchen stays soft in the center too long and the bottom crust turns soggy. The windowsill was not decoration. It was the only cooling rack we had. Number 9, seasoning cast iron through years of use. A brand new skillet is rough and gray. You cook in it every day, wipe it out with a little grease, and over months and years it builds up a dark, smooth surface that nothing sticks to. That seasoning is layers of oil baked into the metal by heat and time. You cannot buy it. You can only earn it. My grandmama's skillet was so slick you could fry an egg in it without a drop of grease and it would slide right off. Number 8, building from the Trinity. Onion, celery, and bell pepper chopped fine and cooked in fat until they go soft. That is the starting line of nearly everything. Gumbo, smothered pork chops, stewed okra, dirty rice. The onion brings sweetness, the celery brings a green bite, and the pepper brings just enough brightness. You learn that combination once, and you carry it for life. Number 7. Smothering anything tough under a heavy lid. Smothering means you take a piece of meat that nobody with money would look twice at, a round steak, a pork chop cut thin, a piece of chicken back, and you lay it in a skillet with onions and a little water or broth, put the heaviest lid you own on top, and cook it low until the steam and the liquid break that toughness down into something tender. The lid traps the moisture. The low heat keeps the meat from seizing up, and the onions cook down into a gravy that nobody had to make separately because the dish made its own. My mama smothered everything. Smothered cabbage, smothered okra, smothered potatoes. If it was tough, it got the lid. If it was cheap, it got the lid. There was a round steak she used to buy because it was the cheapest cut at the store, and on its own that piece of meat would fight your jaw for 20 minutes. But she would season it, lay it in the skillet with a pile of sliced onions, pour in just enough water to cover the bottom, set that heavy lid on top, and walk away. 2 hours later, the fork went through it like butter, and the onions had melted into a brown gravy that you would put on anything: rice, bread, the back of your hand if nobody was watching. When I was a girl, I asked her why she always covered the pot, and she said, because what is inside needs time and quiet to turn into what it is going to be. I have thought about that answer every day of my cooking life. Number 6. Pickle brine in potato salad. You take a splash of juice from your jar of pickles and stir it into your potato salad while the potatoes are still warm. The vinegar and salt in the brine seasons the potato from the inside, and it keeps the salad from tasting heavy even after you add the mayonnaise. My mama said the secret to good potato salad is the thing nobody can taste but everybody misses when it is not there. Number 5. Turning yesterday's rice into breakfast. Cold rice from the night before goes into a hot skillet with a little grease, an egg cracked on top, and whatever was left in the icebox. Onion ends, a scrap of sausage, a handful of greens. 5 minutes later, you have a full plate that cost you nothing and used everything. The cold rice fries better than fresh because it has dried out just enough to crisp on the edges. Number 4. Letting dough rest until it tells you. You mix your biscuit dough and then you leave it alone. Do not poke it. Do not roll it right away. Let it sit for 10 or 15 minutes and the gluten relaxes, the butter firms back up, and the dough becomes easy to handle. Dough that is worked too fast fights you and bakes up tough. Dough that rests rises lighter and flakier because you gave it room to breathe. Number 3. Saving watermelon rind for preserves. You peel the green skin off, cut the white rind into cubes, and cook it with sugar, vinegar, and spices until it turns translucent and sweet. Those preserves taste like something between a pickle and a candy, and they come from the part of the watermelon that most people throw in the trash. In a house where you could not afford to waste, the rind was not garbage. It was dessert. Number 2. Handing the spoon to a child. You let a child stir the pot. You let her pour the batter. You let her crack the egg even though she will get shell in the bowl and you will have to fish it out. That is not a mess. That is how the knowledge moves. A child who stands at the stove with her grandmother learns things in her hands that she will never forget and never be able to explain to anyone who was not there. My grandmama Cleo handed me the spoon when I was barely tall enough to reach it. 69 years later, it is still in my hand. Number 1. Never measuring a thing. Not a cup. Not a spoon. Not a pinch that came from a measuring set. My mama cooked by feel, by sight, by the sound food made when it was ready, and the way it moved in the pot when it was not. She knew a batter was right by how it poured off the spoon. She knew her greens needed salt by the color of the liquor. She knew the biscuits were done by the smell that came through the kitchen door before she ever opened it. I watched her make cornbread 1,000 times, and I never once saw her look at a number. She scooped the meal, she cracked the egg, she poured the milk until it looked right, and it was right every single time. People today call that intuition. My mama did not call it anything. She just did it. And when I stand at my own stove in Memphis now, 69 years after that first morning on the milk crate, my hands do the same thing hers did. They know before my mind catches up. That is not sloppiness. That is the opposite. That is knowing a thing so deep in your body that a recipe would only slow you down. Every trick on this list lives in the same place, not on a page, not in a book. In the hands of the women who did it 10,000 times and never once needed to be told. 40 tricks, and not a single one of them came from a cookbook. They came from kitchens where the stove was always warm and the women who stood at it were always tired and always cooking anyway. I want you to try one, just one, this week. Do not look at a recipe. Do it the way somebody showed you or the way you remember it being done. And then come to the comments and tell me what it was. Whose kitchen did you learn it in? What county? What it smelled like when it was right. I want to hear it before it is gone. Now go on and cook something, baby.